All right. Hello, everyone. Well, it is 3 p.m. Eastern, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the 2023 Office of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Training and Technical Assistance Institute. Our theme this year is Pathways to Inclusion, Engaging People and Expanding Access Across the Lifespan. My name is Cherie Moon. I am the Technical Assistance Manager for ITAC. ITAC provides TA services through a 5-year contract awarded to the National Association of Councils on Developmental Disabilities to provide technical assistance services to councils. Each year, we develop and facilitate a training and technical assistance institute for members of the DD network. Usually we gather in person, but for the past few years, we have been hosting this institute online. Our goal remains focused on bringing you information that will provide you or help to implement the DD Council program in your state or territory. Before we get started, I am just going to go over some brief housekeeping to help you participate better. Closed captioning is available on the bottom of your screen. You should see the square with the letter CC and live transcript. Click the up arrow to select how you want to see the captions. You can select subtitles and they will show at the bottom of your screen, or full transcript on the right side of your Zoom screen. There should be in the chat also stream text for closed captioning as well. There's also the chat feature. The chat feature is available as always. This allows you to post a message to everyone or to specific people to post in the chat, type your message and hit enter. There is a short question and answer opportunity at the end. We will save all questions for that time. You can post your question in the chat box, or you can use your raised hand feature. Please make sure you stay on mute during the presentation to prevent background noise and other distractions. We will also conduct a quick poll of questions at the end of the session, and we will appreciate your participation. So thank you guys so much for that. So I would like to introduce you guys. The 2023 OIDDTA Institute was planned by a group of your peers, and this session is going to be introduced by Sylvia Medina. Sylvia works with the Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities. She was hired as a temporary employee in September of 2017, and in April 2018, she became full-time. She is a grants manager and contracts compliance specialist, where she manages 17 grants. Sylvia earned her bachelor's degree in business administration from St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas. And here, I would like to introduce you guys to Sylvia. Sylvia?
Thank you, Cherie. Welcome. You have joined this session titled Home and Community-Based Services, Expanding Engagement Strategies. In this session, attendees will hear about work and findings to date on home and community-based settings rule. Also, council engagement strategies will be explored and highlighted. Today's session has 3 speakers. The first one is Jill Jacobs, who is the Commissioner for Administration on Disabilities. Jill Jacobs was appointed to serve as the Commissioner of ACL's Administration on Disabilities on February the 14th, 2022. Ms. Jacobs has more than 2 decades of professional experience managing disability services organizations, analyzing policy, and working toward improved health and disability programs and services at local, state, and federal levels. Our second speaker is Kate Brady. She is a project manager for the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems and HCBS Setting Rule Engagement. Kate brings experiences from work across multiple systems, including home and community-based services, vocational rehabilitation, Medicaid, Social Security, and workforce development. The other speaker is Erica McFadden. She is a director for the Office of Independent Living Programs at Administration on Disabilities. Erica has experience with advocacy in the disability community, and she has also served as the director of the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. And now I would like to turn it over to Commissioner Jacobs.
Hi, everybody. Yay, y'all asked me back already just from an hour ago. Thank you. So we are going to talk today about home and community-based services. I mentioned it earlier a little bit when we were talking. I am not a PowerPointy person. I like to just chat. But the folks that are helping me, that are presenting with me, Kate and Erica, they're going to PowerPoint you. So what I want to talk about today, I talked a little bit about HCBS settings rule. And so I'll just kind of reiterate what I said earlier. The HCBS settings rule is really about civil rights, basic human rights for people with disabilities and people who are aging. Primarily, if you think about your life or my life, if we're hungry, we get something to eat. If we're thirsty, we have a drink. If I want to lock my bedroom door or my house door, I can. I have keys to my house. I can have visitors when I want, any time of day or night. They can be the people that I want to visit. If I want to have a little drink on a Friday night, I can. I want to have a boyfriend, a girlfriend, that too. So they're basic rights that we all have, should have access to. That is really the core of home and community-based settings rule. There's a whole laundry list of items that when we are looking at the home and community-based settings rule and identifying how well a state is doing on making the HCBS settings rule happen, how well they're implementing it. And when we go and look at providers to see how well providers are implementing it, what they understand, what they need help on, we go through there's a whole assessment that we do. But in general, we have really been focused on the settings rule for a while. This past year, I have personally I have lost count of how many states to look at and to identify how the state's doing. And when we take these visits, we travel all around the state. So for example, in Florida, flew into Miami, saw providers in Miami. We met with state folks from the state who, stayed with us, followed us along. We started at Miami. We stopped at providers all the way up Florida, all the way into the Panhandle, and saw, we're there for a week. We see lots of providers, and we have a lot of conversations with people from the state. So there's a lot that goes into it. We really put our hearts and souls into it. We really care a lot at ACL about this. And part of what we've done is help to bring advocates together with CMS to identify what's happening in their states. So we even go out once after having these meetings, if advocates have identified a particular provider they think we need to go to, or they identify kind of systemic issues in the state, or the state says this, but it's actually that. We look into that while we're there. We go and visit providers that have been identified, and we make an effort to do that. It's been a long road. Some people think we're coming to the end of that road. I believe, and ACL believes, that there's more work to do. It may not be these visits like this. But there's certainly more monitoring to do. There's more work to do. There's more conversation to be had around it. So I want to give you all a little example about our visits, and in particular, a story that I found. Let me just say this. We write these reports when we come back. There's a lot of stuff in the report about where there were problems, right? So I am an advocate at heart, an activist at heart. So y'all are going to hear me calling people out, right? There's a problem here, there's a problem there. And the reports can be pretty strong. But today I thought, I want to talk about at least one example of something beautiful that this HCBS settings rule I have seen illustrated. I'm not going to identify the specific state because, I don't want to call any state out as a favorite or not so great, but I'm going to tell y'all a story. In one particular state, we visited a group home. And it's the kind of situation where typically I would say, oh my gosh, no, right? It's kind of a group of group homes on this street. And typically I would say, ugh, no. Now those group homes are in a neighborhood, right? They're in the community, but sometimes when we see a group of group homes, we start to think isolation, separation, they only do things together, group outings, everyone has dinner together, etc. So I'm not gonna lie, I went in with that kind of that expectation. And here's something that I saw. A story of two people, right? An individual in his late 20s, early 30s. He was living somewhere else in an apartment, which is typically what I imagine. Having my own apartment is the coolest thing. But a big part of the HCBS settings rule and what we all believe here for people with disabilities is choice, right? We get to choose. Person-centered planning. This is all about me. I get to choose. I get to decide what matters to me is what matters. It doesn't matter what other people think. So even though Jill thinks, why, I should have my own place, right? My own apartment. Doesn't mean that's what everyone thinks. So there's a man, late 20s, early 30s. I would call him a young man because I'm older, way older than that, but a man who was living in his own apartment. And he had a girlfriend, I'm sure still has, a girlfriend. So one day he was at an activity and he heard people talking that the house across the driveway, one of these group homes from his girlfriend, had an opening. There was a room open there. He doesn't communicate in kind of, like you and I might communicate. His communication is, different from us. So he had to work really hard to make it known he wanted to move into that space because it was across the driveway from his girlfriend. So I get where he's coming from, even though it's not an apartment. Now Jill can start to understand, I'd probably want to do that too. So he made it known. He went through person-centered planning process, got everything adapted, and it was approved. Even though a lot of people said, are you sure you have an apartment? The blah, blah, blah. This was his choice. This is what he wanted to do. This is what was important to him. So he moved into this group home. Once he moved into the group home, he convinced everyone, including his roommates, because in home and community-based services under the settings rule, decor and what the place looks like, everyone has to agree in common areas. You could decorate your own room however you want. But common areas, everyone gets to decide, right? That's a group thing that we all choose. So he convinced his roommates and the people who support him at the house that he wanted the main picture window of this house on the driveway to be decorated for Valentine's Day. We were there right before Valentine's Day with hearts and I love you all around. And they agreed. He persuaded everyone. And now every day he gets home earlier than his girlfriend on purpose. And he goes right up to that window and sits there and waits for her to roll up at the end of the day and see his smiling face and all his hearts, I love you. You're my girlfriend, every day. So right there, I can see how home and community-based services settings rule has affected this individual and those around him. He got to choose where he wants to live. He had to figure out how to persuade people how to decorate the house with hearts on the window, right? He got to choose how to build a relationship with this person, with his girlfriend. So I also learned once he moved in, this man learned that it's not all about hearts and flowers and putting your face in the window and smiling. There's other things, right? There's building a relationship. So he and his girlfriend decided they were going to go out to dinner every night now that they live next to each other, right? They soon learned that's not how things work. So he and the girlfriend together with their support people had to start working on their budget and making decisions about how are we going to, improve our relationship? How are we going to make decisions about our relationship about, if we want to go out to dinner? So they had to work on their budget. They had to decide where they like to go to dinner. Maybe she likes Red Lobster and he likes this place, and they had to make all these kind of things that you and I do all the time in a relationship, right? So they figured out their budget. When are they going to go out? How are they going to get there? Who's going to go with them? So all these things they had to start figuring out now because they live near each other and they can build this relationship together. They decided that 2 nights a week, they're going to meet in the middle. They had to figure out how to get a picnic table so they can meet in the middle and have dinner 2 nights a week. Who's bringing dinner on Tuesday? Who's bringing dinner on Thursday? How do we budget for that? So all these choices and decisions, because of one settings rule, a person having a choice to leave what you and I might think is the perfect for anybody and go somewhere else, has led to a multitude of decisions for this man and his girlfriend, and a multitude of learning and multiple opportunities to be part of the community in his smaller community there with the group homes, but the larger community that they belong to and that they live in. So I wanted to just chat about that. I wanted to say that the settings rule really matters. It matters to people with disabilities as individuals. It matters to the disability community. It matters to the larger community, and it matters to relationships. Whether it's a relationship that I have with my boyfriend and I put my face in the heart window, whether it's a relationship that I have with my neighbor down the way, a relationship I have with the disability advocacy organization, or I have with my favorite restaurant. It's about community and it's about relationships. So I will turn it over to Kate.
Thank you, Commissioner Jacobs. I am so excited to be talking to the DD councils. I worked at the Georgia DD Council for about 5.5 years as the deputy. And I love this network. I think you all are so well positioned to be the leads in your state around engagement with home and community-based services. You've got grantees that are advocacy organizations. So what we're going to do today, and I'll share the time with Erica, is we're just going to quickly sort of level set around what's been happening, thanks to the dedicated funding from HCL to support engagement across the country with home and community-based supports and services. And then we really want to hear from you all about what's been working well in your state and what stands out as unmet needs. So we'll make sure to save some time for discussion. So just real quick, NCAPS is where I work. It's administered by the Human Services Research Institute, and it is the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems, co-funded by ACL and CMS with the goal of promoting systems change to make person-centered principles not just an aspiration, but a reality in the lives of people across the lifespan. We're focused on participant and family engagement, cultural and linguistic humility, and cross-system collaboration. Oh, here's a funny bit of animation. So our hope is that people will know what to expect from planning processes, services, and supports, that facilitators will be well qualified and well supported, that systems will deliver services and supports in a manner that's consistent with person-centered values, that change will be driven by people with lived experience across all levels of the system, that quality measures will document both implementation, experience, and outcomes that are based on people's preferences and goals. And last but not least, that we're operating in a way that centers continuous learning throughout the system. So I don't think this audience really needs a refresher on what is home and community-based services, but just recognizing that sometimes your TA Institute orients new council employees, and admitting that I see some old friends on the line that don't need this information. I just wanted to be sure that we're all on the same page, that we're thinking about HCBS services as those services that are funded supports for employment, transportation, home health care, activities of daily living, finances, assistive tech, home modifications. We know in 2018, more than 4.7 million people received Medicaid-funded HCBS, and that there's tremendous variation, right? Each of you is working in a state with a unique waiver program, and you're advocating across those waivers to ensure compliance with the rule for which the transition period has ended, right? So that's the new situation that we're in, that March 17th has come and gone. So rather than looking at STPs, we're looking at corrective action plans, and we'll make sure that you have the website where you can track your state's progress on the approval of their cap if you're not already aware of that. And so it's a different time. Jill referenced the heightened scrutiny site visits that the ACL employees did in collaboration with CMS, and those were tremendously powerful, and we have reports on those visits, but those visits are also sunsetting, right? So we'll see heightened scrutiny submissions only on new provider organizations going forward. So as a reminder, the final rule puts forward requirements for both the planning process and the plan itself. And so you'll have these slides just as a reference. No surprise that the plan ought to be led by the individual, include people chosen by the individual, that it should provide any information the person needs to be sure they can lead the process, and that they have access to real meaningful choices that they can navigate and make decisions. As we know, this is a common challenge in systems, but that, annual planning or service planning or person-centered planning should be happening in a way that is at a time and place chosen by the individual. It should always document that settings that are not disability specific settings have been considered. For the plan itself, it should always reflect that the person chose the place that they live, that their strengths and preferences are reflected, and that any clinical or support needs are determined through a functional assessment. So why might I bother naming all this? The reason we name it is that the plan serves as the vehicle to protect the person's right to have the services in which they receive supports be ones that are compliant with the home and community-based settings rule. So even in situations where the state has not fully implemented, or you as a council member or an advocate might believe that a setting is out of compliance, this plan guarantees the person's rights to services that are in compliance with the rule. So the plan ought to identify who's responsible for monitoring it. It should identify what those supports are going to be, who they will be provided by, and which of them are paid and unpaid. And it should identify any natural supports, right? It's going to include goals, outcomes, any risk factors. It should be written in plain language and agreed to by the individual. And there's that CMS caution of preventing unnecessary or inappropriate services. Important to note that people receiving supports have protection from restrictions. So any restriction that's put in place must be accompanied by an assessed need and a plan for reduction of that support, and the documentation of other methods that have been tried before the restriction is put in place. Any restriction should include a time limitation and should be accompanied by informed consent and the assurance that no harm will occur. So there's the reminder, right? We know what home and community-based services are. We know that the plan provides additional protection, and yet we know that implementation doesn't work without substantial engagement of people receiving services, their loved ones, and other people in the community impacted. And I'm working to move myself away from the word stakeholder, just having learned that it can be offensive because of its colonial roots. So I'm working on that. But thankfully, we have had the opportunity at HSRI to convene the National Disability Network in a number of activities related to supporting the engagement of people, both at the state and local level, in responding to initially the statewide transition plans, and then more recently heightened scrutiny site visits. And what I'd like to spend most of our time today is thinking about what we can do going forward. So I think councils are by design rooted in the recognition of how critical stakeholder engagement is. You're driven by your councils. You're often funding self-advocacy networks. And it's these tools that you can bring to bear both in the short and long run to advance compliance with the settings rule. So we have been operating an engagement coalition that's funded by ACL, and we've particularly seen really exciting new connection between the DD Network Triad, if you will, right? The DD councils, PNAs, and USAIDs, and the Independent Living Network, both the statewide Independent Living Councils and the Independent Living Centers. And of course, there's tremendous history of having some shared interests and yet not always being fully integrated or fully aligned in advocacy. And at the national level, we started to see a shift there. We've been reviewing state transition plans, building community level awareness of the rule, raising setting specific issues with both ACL and CMS, and collecting a number of resources, many of which will be reflected here, but I'm happy to, I'll put my email in the chat if there are others I can send you directly. So our collaborative includes April, which is the Association of People in Rural Independent Living, ASAN, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, AUCD, Association of University Centers on Disability, NACDD, NASIL, because that's the National Association of Statewide Independent Living Councils, NDRN, the National Disability Rights Network, and then SARTAC and SABE. And each contractor has produced resources, shared webinars. They have supported in their state as a heightened scrutiny visit occurred. They have supported the identification of resources on the ground, people with lived experience who have important stories to tell of their rights being violated in those states. And you'll note when you look at the Medicaid website that, as Commissioner Jacobs mentioned, those site visit reports are quite powerful. So we're so grateful that ACL has been working so closely with CMS to ensure appropriate implementation of the HCBS final rule. And this is the first time that we've seen dedicated funding for public engagement efforts. During the transition period, we heard from individual people and their families, neighbors. We saw many states in which the protection and advocacy organization was leading the way around organizing advocates, others in which the councils were leading the way. We heard from parent groups, sibling groups, self-advocacy groups, statewide independent living councils, and centers for independent living. But looking to the future in recognizing that the transition period has ended, right? And so we now have to be rooted in the state's ongoing business of administering services and monitoring those services. And what that called us to think about is both what are the short-term, fast approaching ways for you as councils to engage? And then what are the long-term strategies that you might take to ensure that you're well poised to advocate on these issues? So one thing that many of you may already be in process with is looking at the existing structures that are available to you into which you can embed collaboration. So obviously every council has a council. Every USAID has a community advisory council. Every statewide independent living council has a board, and all states have Medicaid advisory councils. To whatever degree you can, embed yourselves in those independent living structures and invite your silks and your independent living centers to participate. You will be building those relationships to better advocacy forwards when the time comes. We also recognize all councils have in their backyards potential advocacy organizations as grantees in the independent living centers. And so that's something to consider. What we anticipate being the windows of opportunity are waiver amendments and waiver renewals. And we know that those are on different schedules in each state, and we're working to think about what might be a good national strategy for tracking, because it's not terribly uncommon for those notices in states to be buried behind 6 links. That was certainly the case in Georgia. It might be 5 layers deep on the state website before you could find notice of a waiver renewal. So if you're not in regular conversation, that can be something that gets missed. And the other thing that we saw be really powerful in the preparation for heightened scrutiny visits, in which advocates came together at the state level, talked to each other, talked to ACL, and really prepared strategically to present their concerns to CMS, is that it was so important to have identified a coordinator, right? You can think about that in the spirit of collective impact and having a backbone organization. But that role clarity contributed tremendously to people being able to be prepared for the conversation at the time, and then also able to follow up. And this is something you all are familiar with from working session. I'm gonna touch on a few resources, and then Erica, I'll pass it to you and pull up the chat. These links I'll paste in the chat while you're talking, Erica. This is the link to the ACL webinar series on getting the services you need from the waiver. There are some recordings at that first link, and the coming session will be on May 17th at 2 p.m. and the registration link there is included. And then the access rule, which, we're not spending our time today talking about because we said we'd talk about HCBS, but public comment is open until July 3rd, and we anticipate the access rule will contribute tremendously to the kind of services councils know people need and deserve. And so we hope that you'll consider providing comment there. I've included the Federal Register link for you, but there's also a wonderful ACL blog, kind of, which you may have heard about this morning in your ACL session. A little plug here for an NCAPS resource, which is an asset map toolkit. And I won't belabor it too much today, but if you are working in a council where you don't find yourself super connected to local partners, this toolkit provides a process and some templates for you to follow to map out those resources and begin that engagement with your partners. All right, Erica, shall I turn it to you?
Yes, let me just tag on to what you just talked about, Kate. Thank you so much for introducing those resources. and some tips for us moving forward. I just, I think some of the things I'm going to say is kind of repeating what Kate said. First of all, I want to thank you all for having us here today, because this is so extremely important to the IDD community and families that we support. Because without strong HCBS in our states, we all know that it's hard for us to be able to help individuals gain control over their own lives and live the lives they want to lead, which is what what we're doing, the councils are doing to help support that. So, and then in the spirit of system change, I was going to talk about some strategies and tips to kind of move, get the ball rolling. And I have to tell you, a lot of these strategies and tips I actually learned from you all when I was back in Arizona. So thank you. And then I just want to let you guys know, I know there's a lot of new directors too, and I know you all are already connecting with each other, but it is so important to make sure you have the right people connected to help you with system change efforts. If you look around, so Kate introduced this asset mapping tool. If you look around in your space and you feel like you're in a silo and you're not connecting to cross-disability organizations like Centers for Independent Living, who have a lot of self-advocates, because by mandate, the majority of their people with of their staff have to be people with disabilities, and the majority of their board have to be people with disabilities. So if you're not connecting with them, if you're not strong, your DD networks aren't strong, it's kind of time to take a step back and look to how to about strengthening those right now. Because the idea of strengthening HCBS, you have to do that with a strong coalition. You can't do that on your own. And so make sure you have the right people on your teams to be able to do that. If people don't understand Medicaid, and if you don't understand Medicaid, the tools that Kate provided, the webinar series, has a lot of good information about what to look for, getting in the weeds on for the amendment process. Understanding, like when you go into Medicaid, what are some sections that you can ask for in your state to make sure that you have the right services in your state, and whether it's an 1115 waiver or a 1915, there's different things you can do. I have to tell you, in full disclosure, I was also, I've been part of the site visit teams going to several of the states. If you want to get a real feel for what the inside of some of these group homes or assisted living facilities or other residential care homes look like, take a look at any of the reports, even though they're not in your state. You'll see consistent systemic issues. And I guarantee you that they're probably in your state as well. And so if you don't have the space right now where your groups are coming together to talk about HCBS, I suggest you create one, because I know that councils are really good at convening new spaces. That's one of the strengths of councils. They see opportunity, they see ways to innovate, and they know how to bring the right people together to start making change. And I encourage you that when you create those spaces and look at what do you want HCBS to look like in your states, that you center the voices of people with IDD. And I know, being from a recovering council director, how hard it is to find people with DD to be able to include in those conversations, because sometimes they're just too busy or they don't understand. And so it's our job to be able to make things in plain language, to train up, all of our champions and allies to ensure we're all on the same page, and connecting with those organizations that have strong self-advocates involved, including our Centers for Independent Living. So again, I just remind you all that that part I know is difficult. We typically are better at involving families than individuals with DD. But again, I know that with stakeholder involvement, it's so important to actually include the service recipient themselves, because they're the ones that can tell what lives they want, right? And so that's just a couple of things to say. I do want to say that, that I know a lot of us sit on, HCBS advisory committees and things like that. And so sometimes we go in and there's already a predetermined agenda by the state. So when you think about the spaces you're already in, how effectively are you using those spaces? When you come in, do you understand all the what they're asking, what the state's asking for, what they're planning? And if you don't understand, do you know who to connect with in your state to get information before you go to those meetings so you're prepared? And I think that a lot of times we go because we're asked to go, but sometimes we're like, wait, why are we here and what are we doing? So if that happens to you, and I know like that happens a lot with states because they send you a last minute agenda and you're just scratching your head. I think a lot of it's asking those questions with state. What's the long-term plan? What is this connect? How is this connecting to what we're wanting? And then working with your allies to make sure you have a plan in place moving forward in the short term and the long term, so you come prepared. So those are just the things to put, some things to put forward as we look at how we can use HCBS. And, and when we create these coalitions and strengthen these coalitions, it's not just great for HCBS, it's for any kind of advocacy you're trying to do around system change. So really, this just is a time to reboot with all the things that have happened and relook at how you want to approach, supporting and advancing the voices of people with DD in your states. And so I'm going to turn it back over to, I think Jill is handling the questions, but because I learned from all of you, we thought it would be a good time to throw it back out to you with these discussion questions, because we all learn from each other on what we can do better when it comes to engagement. So I'm going to turn it over to Jill.
Hey, everybody. So as Erica said, you can go and look at reports. I think that the link was put in the chat there. You can look at reports from any state to get an idea of what's going on. What we have seen has been, some systemic issues. There are some commonalities, issues around case management, issues around person-centered plans. We have seen this in every state, I would say. Caps are being issued, so we have to talk about how will everyone continue to engage and track what's happening, stay on top of it, what's happening in your state. So we're going to continue doing work around advocacy, pulling people together, making sure that word is out. But now we want to open it up to all of you to ask questions or start a conversation around it. What have you seen in your state? What do you know is going on there? What questions do you have around the process in general? If you want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat. I'm not sure if we have the capability to turn, like, for your camera to be on to ask.
Yes, we do. You can use the raised hand feature, or you can turn your camera on.
Okay. Well, Kate kicked it off with what are some strategies your council has used to inform HCBS in your state that you find effective? What has been the result? What partners are you working with around HCBS? Who should be there that isn't, and how do you plan on engaging with them? For those sitting on HCBS advisory committees, what are some effective ways to engage the state in these spaces? What can councils do to get the most of their time? So any of you, if you can share success stories, lesson learned, tell us what's going on there with you, or if you have a question of your own, please feel free. We would love to hear y'all speak up. We really need to know from you.
Hey there, this is Lauren Goodkin from the Attendance Council. We are trying to work on things like pre-vocational submissions, and there's not been great spaces where people can sit around, a metaphorical or literal table and actually discuss what's happening. And one of the things that we hear about and we're, concerned with is how to balance the parent voices with the self-advocate voices. Because in Texas, there's a major concern around, rehabilitation, which is now called individual skills and socialization, shutting down and not being able to function under the new rule. And the parent voices are, kind of the loudest right now.
Mhm.
Do y'all have any insight into what's going on in your state on, respecting parent voices, but really highlighting some advocates and getting your state agencies to listen to some advocate voices at least equally, if not more, than the other voices? I know that was a loaded question, but I'm
That's
happy to
okay.
repeat anything.
I appreciate it. So there's two parts, it seems, how to, I guess, quiet the parent voices a little bit so that people with disabilities can be heard. And the second one is how to get the state agency to listen. So I certainly have my ideas on that, but I think the best way to answer this is from some of you. Do any of you have a response to that question? How do you get parent voices to be lower, and how do you get the state agency to listen? DD Council folks, anyone want to speak up and tell me what you do in your state around that?
I see you've got a few hands up.
Okay,
Joe, I see Kim, Kirsten, and Daryl's hands.
okay. Daryl, did you want to respond to that, or did you have another question?
Well, I'm just going to kind of highlight some of the things that we've done in our state. But I guess one of the things really we have to really emphasize the most important to the state, to those agencies throughout the state, and just kind of, sell the story, kind of like marketing, and just kind of, get them to understand and see the big picture, because really it's a win-win situation for all of us. At the end of the tunnel, it's a big, win-win situation versus, bits and pieces, or certain agencies on board, certain agencies not on board. So just kind of, working with agencies and answering those questions that they may have that they may not know, because a lot of times you just got to educate the state workers, educate the governor's office, and all of those who are involved, because it is a win-win situation for whatever state is involved.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I would say on how to quiet parent voices, a way to do that would be to make it clear to providers, to talk with providers and to talk with the state about person-centeredness, about person-centered planning. And so while that's important individually, when it's important individually, and understood that person-centeredness for an individual is important, it can become more understood collectively as a group as well. And to talk with other people with disabilities about person-centeredness, and pull together with other people with disabilities to make your voices heard collectively. I really feel that's the best tool. It looks like okay, Kim Mercer, you have your hand up, and it looks like there's also some answers in the chat if y'all want to read those.
So I originally raised my hand to answer a couple of the questions presented on the slide, but I can also sort of address Lauren's question as well about just one thing that we did here, and I can throw the link in the chat, is that we partnered with our P&A and our Guardianship and Advocacy Commission here in Illinois, and provided a training and a webinar that I can share the link as it's on YouTube, it was targeted to providers about how to handle the guardianship role in the implementation of the HCBS settings rules. And so we kind of dove into provider strategies for how to, in some cases, address those situations when maybe a guardian's desire is also an infringement on the setting rule, and they have where does that end and where does the intervention begin? And so I can post that link. I just wanted to highlight a couple pieces about what we did in response to the questions here that are posted. We have been involved pretty heavily from the very beginning, and at some points in this process of HCBS settings rule, we're the only entity in some periods in between governors, in between administrations, because the DD councils stay. We're a consistent voice sometimes when administrations change. And so we experienced this administration turnover in our state, where at one point we were the only entity that was really focused and advocating on this, because there was an administration change and leadership change in our Medicaid agency and our DD administration. So we had to hold the voice steady while those new professionals were getting in their roles. And as soon as they sat down, we hit it hard because we knew it was such an important and time sensitive topic. We stayed right on top of the different versions of our transition plan, each time providing detailed comments, but from our self-advocate voice. So we really had to dig in and take the time to educate people on what it was that they were reading, what we perceived to be the shortcomings, how that would impact them. So then they had the voice and the ability from an informed point of view to tell the state how these rules will impact and would impact their life, and how the state's approach is good or bad in relation to that. So I would just say the time that it took to absorb and then educate and then gather their feedback and then turn it back out, I think was one of the really pivotal roles that our council played. In addition to bringing partners to the table and investments in creation of curriculum and trainings and side-by-side technical assistance for providers that needed help being brought along the way. So we've done all kinds of different pieces here. But one thing that I will say is that all of that pre-work of understanding what was in our statewide transition plan, all of that pre-work that we did has serving us well now, because now we know what implementation is supposed to look like. And so as we're in this stage now of kind of waiting to see what implementation specifically is, how it's going to roll out and how it's going to look, we know what to look for, and just staying engaged on the advisory committees that we are assigned to. So it's a lot, though. It's a lot. So I'll stop now.
I really appreciate that, Kim. And I will say that, in your state, the input that you provided to CMS, that you provided to ACL, we really took that to heart. It was valuable to us, and we went to places that you all recommended, and we kept in mind the comments that you made when we did that. So it is definitely appreciated that you've been on top of it, and you have been that steady voice, that organization that's been there. I think next is Kirsten Murphy.
Oh, thanks so much. Hi, we've done a lot of things, but I wanted to highlight one strategy that I don't want folks to miss. We have it in our signed assurances that we're going to be involved in quality assurance activities in our states. And so at our council in Vermont, we've been trying to use negotiations around what some of the reportable quality metrics are between the state and CMS as an opportunity to build accountability around the standards set in the HCBS settings rules, right? So we want our quality assurance activities to align with the rule and come up to the standard of the rule. I think Vermont's very tempted to kind of use the lowest common denominator for reporting on HCBS to CMS, and we're trying really hard to use things like the national core indicators and advocate that those more detailed beneficiary experience type surveys, especially when they touch on aspects of the important rights people have under the settings rules, become part of our regular quality assurance activities. And because the council has that special assurance, I think, we're getting a little pushback from the state, like, who are you to be involved in this? But we keep pointing to our assurances and going, well, look, you signed this. So I just wanted to pass that idea along. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. That is a brilliant strategy. I love that you all did that. I think there was a follow-on. There's some follow-on questions in the chat, so please make sure that you take a look at those. I would also comment, Kirsten, I mentioned earlier when I spoke briefly about what we're working on and will be really focusing on moving forward, the access rule. So when you talk about quality, all that groundwork that you have done, quality and tying it to the settings rule, you are on point, ahead of the game. So stay on top with the access rule, my friend. You are right out front.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Let's see, I think I've got, who else had, I know I saw another person's hand raised, Emmanuel Jenkins.
Yep.
Thank you so much. If I understand the last question correctly, it was more about how to elevate one voice but lower the voices of parents. Is that what I understood?
I think that was the question.
So I just want to highlight here in Delaware, I think this goes back to what everybody has said. I think what makes the council so unique in this position is that we do have the ability to educate, advocate, and inform. And I think what happens is where you have more parent voices or more provider voices, there comes this piece of the need to educate family members and providers that individuals with disabilities can and shall be at the table to be the architect of whatever their plan is. And I think that kind of puts the council in the position to not only educate, but then follow up with that quality assurance. Is this indeed happening? Because it's one thing to have a plan, but then it's also the other piece of ensuring that that plan is being implemented and really having the ability to hold those agencies accountable. And that may look different for every single council, but I know for us in Delaware, sometimes it only takes an email or a phone call to say, hey, we're aware about this. We got a call from so-and-so, and they want to know why this particular thing hasn't occurred. So then when I make that connection, then they're like, oh, well, we'll get right on it. Because now you know you have somebody watching, so now they're going to kind of do what they should have been already doing. In the ideal world, it wouldn't take someone like a council to make sure that happens. But until we get there, we are in a unique position to hold them accountable, but also monitor the implementation of said plan, because home and community-based services are not new, but now the feet is being held to the fire to say you now get no more wiggle room, you don't get no more extension. These are the rules and the laws of the land, and now let us help you implement those rules.
Thank you, Emmanuel. So I love some of the phrases that you used, hold their feet to the fire. We are aware, these are the laws of the land, implement, accountability. These are words I love. So I think that is one of the big questions that we are asking now, have to do with all of that, right? So the settings rules out there, it exists. There's these caps now. How do we hold their feet to the fire? How do you all keep them accountable? How do you make sure that they get that these are the laws of the land and you are keeping an eye? Are they following the law? So those are really good questions, are really good comments and good questions to ask and stay on top of. I appreciate that. And I'm wondering how some of the rest of your councils are working on accountability, or you're letting your state know that you are watching, you're on top of them. Anyone?
Commissioner, before we turn it back to them, I just had a second thought too. Besides Kirsten being able to pull that magic trick with the assurance, which I think is amazing. The whole thing about the DD network and connecting with, for example, a PNA, your Protection Advocacy Center there, they have the ability to go into the group home settings. They have the authority to do that. So if you're looking at quality assurance and ensuring that they're actually upholding what they put, into the plan, they're your people to go in. So that's why it's so important to be able to connect with your, and I'm sure you're already doing that, but I just want to remind you that they have the authority to do that. And that might be a way in to do the QA activities that are missing. Like we found that consistently missing across the board.
So I think are we coming to the end of our time? Do we have still, I think we still have.
We
a
have
little bit
30
of time.
minutes. I
Okay,
think.
great. So what are some of the rest of you all doing around accountability, holding their feet to the fire, letting them know you're on top of them?
I guess, Commissioner, I think, like Erica has mentioned, we have been working with our P&A, and we've actually developed a game plan for the ongoing, because it really will involve a lot of ongoing work. Early on, we've provided our also involved our partners in policymaking graduates to assist us in monitoring and educating members of our state. We have also conducted and continue to conduct town hall meetings throughout our state. So, we've been working really hard. We've had a meeting with our P&A, I think, on last week to talk a little bit about our game plan is, working together with the Department of Mental Health. So it's been really working well in the state of Alabama. So that's a little bit about what we have been involved with.
Thank you, Daryl. I appreciate that. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Kim, and I just wanted to throw in a couple things to think about because I find it interesting, but I have yet to see how it's going to play out here. But one of the components of our state's quality assurance plan as a part of the final STP was a hotline that was being created and an email inbox that was created to provide individuals that are receiving services a forum to kind of report if they're not receiving the services as in accordance to the settings rule. And so I have yet to, but I'm planning to request the data of those calls and to see if our DD agency would provide us any details as to the volume or level of emails they're receiving. I'm hoping I'm wrong, but there might not be many because it's a difficult thing to ensure a person with a developmental disability potentially receiving services in a group home would have the ability to independently make those phone calls and all of that. But if they're following the settings rules, then they should be able to, right? So I'm just curious to see if that's going to be utilized. So that's something I'm keeping an eye out for. And I don't know if other states have had that kind of assurance established. And then I'm also keeping close eye on our corrective action plans and any steps in posted dates. We have several different corrective action plans in place. So just keeping an eye on those and making sure that kind of setting calendar reminders on when some things are due, just so that I remember to circle back and ask. And I also have the ability to pull together our HCBS settings rule advisory committee at any time that I wanted to have a regroup and hear an update. So I'm keeping that in my back pocket as well.
Okay. Anyone else? Oh, it looks like Kristen Larson.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So we're in Nebraska, and I wanted to let you know that we have a unique state statute here that created the Governor's DD Advisory Committee, and that committee is charged, it's governor appointed, and then they give feedback to the Division of Developmental Disabilities on all HCBS waivers. And a couple of years ago, we were able, the rule changed a little bit, and it incorporates all of the DD network partners have to have a seat at that table. So our PNA, our USED, and the DD Council. So I'm representing the council at those meetings. And with the final settings rule, where they are state DD agencies working with Liberty Partnership Quality or Liberty Partnership, and they're working an entity that's doing mortality reviews and critical incident reporting and quality framework, and they have to report on that at all of the meetings. And we're actually meeting more like monthly now with the Governor's DD Advisory Committee, so we can ask good questions to the Liberty Partnership folks and get hands-on data to keep things going and just share our concerns. And that what's nice is that Governor's Committee is much like DD Councils. It's made up of 60% of family members or folks with lived experience or who have disabilities. So I think it's just been a great way that we've been able to leverage getting some improvements in the system. And then we're also trying to make, taking a play from Erica when she was at the Arizona Council and making the rules or the rights and restrictions put in plain language so that the adults or folks that are receiving services understand what their rights are. And so we're serving on a committee on that. So doing a lot of work, but it all comes down to networking with our DD network partners and collaborating and really having a pretty good, safe, trusted relationship with our state folks and helping them understand there are going to be times we push back and that's just what we're supposed to do. So that's all I have.
I appreciate that. I don't know why my camera, there we go. I appreciate that. And again, I had made a comment that, I'm glad to see, the DD councils working, one state DD council, having their work having an impact on another and working together. And I know that happens all the time, but it's so nice to be in a conversation where I hear you all talking about that and how that happens for you. And, credit to all of you for that hard work, and credit to Donna Meltzer and NACDD for, being an organization that brings the DD councils together. So I appreciate that. Other questions, other comments? I see Kate has put some NCAPS resources in the chat. Quite a lot, actually. Thank you, Kate.
Well, no, the links didn't work, so I'm sure that we can make sure people get the PowerPoint.
Okay.
The links will be more live. But you
Okay.
do have the access rule links live in the chat there.
Okay. Anyone else? I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I apologize. I said all that, but I didn't answer the question directly on examples. So what I wanted to, sorry, my doorbell's going off. What I wanted to say really quickly, one of the things we did here in Delaware was we built a relationship with the Delaware Ombudsman, who again would have the authority to go into group homes, nursing homes, to monitor said plan to ensure that people's rights are being upheld and etc. But in addition to that, what I really started doing here as the community relation officer was really looking at the statewide public meeting calendar, and that's where all the agencies and things like that list their meetings and their agendas. And I started kind of going through saying, well, that should be a meeting we should be at. That should, even though it might not scream disability, it screams people are going to be here and somebody should be representing the community at large to be on some of those committees and boards and things of that nature to impact it, even while decisions are being made. So before we even roll it out, instead of us reacting to a decision that we don't agree with, we're now in the development stages of, before you do this, you may want to think about how this is going to impact the disability community. But that big piece was really building a relationship with that ombudsman who used to work for our Delaware Developmental Disability Services. So not only does she have background in ombudsman, but she has background from being a provider on the other side of being a provider. So it was really smart for us to build that relationship with her, because now I can just pick up the phone and call her and say, hey, can you look into XYZ?
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. And, the fact that you are reaching outside of the IDDD community, to look for partnership is really valuable there. I like that you reached to the ombudsman's office on this. But really valuable. Tamara, apologies if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. It looks like you are next.
Yes, and it's Tammy, it's fine. This
Okay.
is more of a question for folks here because you know, we've had a little bit as a state of learned helplessness with regard to the home and community-based settings rule implementation, but we're kind of seeing a new phase of you know, our provider network, while always not adequate for the need that's there, is really in a crisis of constriction. And we have a lot of provider agencies that are going out of business or in fact limiting or transitioning who they're serving to private pay away from Medicaid, you know, which is reducing the amount of options. So I'm just wondering folks' thoughts, because you know, that idea, did you choose where you live, is now becoming we have a lot of examples of people who are in congregate residential settings who are there because that is where there is a bed. And did you choose where you live is becoming a question of, well, there are 2 spots available, which one do we put you in? And I wonder if there's any way to think about the settings rule or leverage it to really get at, no, you need a provider network that actually is providing authentic choice, or if you know the provider network, like the implementation of HCBS is really tied to the providers that are willing to serve this population and that are in fact open. Because we just kind of have this circular issue of you know, you have choices but no options.
Tammy, what state are you in?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Okay. So you know, that you make an excellent point. You know, how do people have choice when there are no choices? You know, not big list of providers, but none actually taking people, or maybe the list isn't realistic, those sort of things. Very important. And I would say that, yes, you can reference the settings rule, you know, and the very argument that you just gave. Look at the caps, look at the cap, look at the report if your state had a visit. And I would say that that's something you could reference. I would say also on the access rule, you know, that's still a proposed rule, but should it pass? So I need everyone to comment on it so that it does. But should it pass, you know, then there's definitely elements of that access rule that apply to this very question. Do people actually have access? Just because they got a slot on the waiver finally, do they have access? And what does that look like? Are there really providers? Are providers accepting program recipients? Do people really have choice? So those 2 things go hand in hand. And I think that, you know, what Kim talked about in Illinois, the kind of the groundwork they did, and how that makes them prepared. And I think someone else said the same thing. I think those are places that you can look for some guidance around that from other states. Anyone else have a comment on that?
Hey, Jill, I'm actually going to put the specific rule in the chat with options for what can be done potentially, so that the councils have it, because that is a continual issue. But I believe that if they're identifying just one type of setting, the rule says there's actually things like private homes, like, and if there's like they're on a wait list and they get this available space, is there a plan moving forward where they can move to one they want? So all that has to be documented in the person-centered service plan, and how they're able to exercise, that individual is able to exercise choice. I'll go ahead and put it in the chat though. Okay, I put it in there, and just know that if there's like, if they have strict needs that they, that it would require a modification to the person-centered service plan, and that they only can go into certain settings, and there's only so many, that should be in the modification section of the person-centered service plan.
And there is some, this is Kate speaking. I'm going to put a link in the chat, but there is some evidence to suggest that provider network insufficiency is in of itself an Olmsted violation, right? Like Olmsted puts forward the requirement that there be those robust options. So I'll put my favorite resource on that. Not that councils are in the business of suing states, but I think there's some precedent there.
Yeah, that's their DD network partner, the PNA.
Absolutely, yep.
Say that in the chat that Kim Mercer Schleider echoed what Tammy said. That, all the efforts haven't solved the core issues that exist, in Wisconsin and Illinois, and provider limitations, and availability impact fidelity. So I am wondering if anyone else experiences that in your state. It looks like Kate put something in the chat about Olmsted and its relationship to availability of real choice in waivers.
Yeah, that's Sam Baggins' on Olmsted. It really kind of changed the way I thought about it.
Anyone else? Questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, it looks like we are coming to a close. I really appreciate your time here today, everyone. Any last words from Erica, Kate?
Yeah, just thank you. Thank you all. I'm going to put my email in the chat for any resources folks weren't able to grab.
Yeah, keep up the great work, because we're all going to continue to be working in this space. Whether it be enforcement over what they said they're going to do versus what you want it to be with the amendments, or when the new waiver renewals come. We'll be helping y'all along. So I'm sure I'll see you all again, as will our commissioner and Kate. And if you have great successes, please share it with your program officers, because we all want to hear when good things like this happen, and we'll take the stuff back that you shared today too, because that gives us, makes us realize that it's working. Like, you guys are doing some great work. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you so much. And know that you can reach out. You know how to reach us. I think Kate put her email there. Yep, kbrady@hsri.org. Thanks, everyone, so much.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you, Commissioner Jacobs. Thank you, Erica. And thank you, Kate. Before you all leave, I did put the poll up. HCBS Exploring Engagement Strategies. We would really like your participation in filling out the poll. And this session concludes our TAI for May 10th. Please stay tuned or get ready for tomorrow at 1 p.m. We'll have board inclusion through meaningful engagement beyond tokenism, effective methods and practices with Dr. Mark Friedman and several staff advocates. So please be there tomorrow for that at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, Thursday, May 11th, 2023. And thank you guys so much for participating.
Bye.